All right. Well, I'm going to do a little surprise addition to the program here while we're waiting for people. Just around 20 minutes ago, Amazon showed up with a package for me, so I'm going to turn this into a surprise unboxing. And I'm going to unbox with, there it is, you can see it, my beautiful knife from Bjorn Blade Works, my favorite online knife maker. They also make, besides excellent knives, they make metal hairpins. Excellent metal hairpins that you just have to be careful about because if you accidentally stuck an attacker with those hairpins 10 or 12 times, they might really regret attacking you. But clearly they're for hair, they're not for self-defense. That couldn't be the possibility. I know an amazing number of friends who actually wear them. So,
With Dave being in the army, I don't foresee him needing one.
excuse me?
With Dave being in the army, I don't foresee him needing a hairpin.
Yeah. All right. I'm not going to bring the box up to show because it is a huge box with 30 books in it. And I would surely not be able to lift it up in front of the camera without breaking something. But here's what I have. They also provided the sheath on this, so it was a full service knife purchase there. So I have got two writing events coming up this month in the next 2 weeks. And I realized that I was very low on inventory, so I ordered some new stock from Amazon. This is Garden Paths, my latest paperback, which is a collection of short stories inspired by sculptures at Frederick Meyer Gardens. Passion project I've been working on for probably 4 years now. And I finally got around. I wrote the stories, but getting around to getting them published just took me some time. This is an older project, Family Secrets, which collects three novellas and novelettes that I wrote. Primarily, I wrote as entries for Writers of the Future. We have one which is my very first entry in Writers of the Future and my first finalist, which was The Mother Anthony, about a young teacher on an interstellar spacecraft that develops mechanical difficulties. And she is pretty sure as things go along that they are not getting to their destination. They're going to end up stranded somewhere in the middle of space. It also has a story about a young man from Haiti who has been dealing with various bullies and primarily the apprentice to the Vaudoon for much of his life. He goes to New York to escape and to study law, and unfortunately, things draw him back to Haiti, where he will have to finally confront the Bokor. And the last one in there is a quirky, weird tale about a mother who wants to get treatment for her son's headaches. And when she takes him to the hospital and he gets put in the MRI machine, horrible nightmares ensue. And then my last one in this collection is Ula, Martian Song, Book One. Someday there will be a book two. I just have two different plots contending for which one is going to be book two. It presumes that H.G. Wells was wrong about what happened when the Martians attacked, and that one of the Martian capsules ends up far from the others, and the Martian and a uh, young, kind of burned out music teacher have to learn to work together. And that one is a certain amount of pride for me because if you study the history of War of the Worlds, Wells, I mean, he said they launched 10 capsules from Mars and 7 of them landed in his neighborhood of London out of 10. It wasn't a war of worlds, it was a war of neighborhoods. And he wrote in commentary that he just wanted to blow up his neighbors. And so I took kind of the same thing. I don't have a lot of blowing up, but I set the story in the area where I grew up, much of it literally on the street where I grew up, just 60 years before I was born. So that was my unboxing for those today. And we still don't have anybody with us. So I think at 8 minutes we can get started here. And if people join us, they join us.
It sounds like a pretty cool premise to the story.
It started out actually, full disclosure here, I was reading Jane Austen's Emma because it happened to be a free book that month on, actually I was listening, it was on Audible, it was a free book. And I said, you know what, I've never read Austen. I really should give it a fair shot, and it's free. And I was about 40 to 50% through Emma when I said, God, is anything going to happen? Is anything going to happen but people planning parties and people going to parties and people talking about parties? And the answer is no. And about 60% mark, I'm like, you know, I would pay anything to have a Martian invasion of this whole culture here in this countryside. And then I started saying, well, there was a Martian invasion. And then I looked at the details, and the time frames were like 70 years apart, and it just wasn't something I could put together and work. But in the meantime, I re-listened to Wells's book, and I found interesting plot holes that were there plain as day in the book, I felt, but Wells hadn't followed those paths. He'd followed other paths. So I said, okay, then those are the plot holes I'm going to explore. So since we have who we're going to have, I will do sharing of my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Yep,
All
got it.
right. In that case, let us go. And we are going to talk about the heart of the story, humanity and science fiction, and other stories. But I was specifically asked to present this to Dave Wolverton early on when he had his Apex writing group. He asked me to give a presentation on this. I may have been the very first guest speaker for Apex. I am not 100% certain, but if there were any before me, I missed them. He asked me to write on this because he said I was very good at humanity and empathy in my stories. I'm like, Dave, I'll do it because you asked me to, but are you sure? And he said, absolutely. And I went to friends and said, Dave thinks I'm good at putting humanity and empathy into my stories. And they said, well, duh. Sometimes you don't see what your own stories are doing because it's too close to you. Apparently, writing my stories the way I do and investing in my characters the way I do is accomplishing something good that I'm not consciously aware of. So I put this together for Dave and have represented it at a couple of conferences, and now here it is in the jazz sessions. Show me the money. All right. I throw that in there. I've been varying these clips, if you've been watching the videos, that I had the pay for the soup and I had the never do it for free. This week we've got show me the money for talking about books, because I do want to sell books, but I also want to teach and help you. So today I want to talk quickly about two books. The one on the right you've seen in the other presentations, Making Story Models, my book on visual techniques for story planning and story problem solving. On the left is Today I Am Carrie. And Today I Am Carrie is probably the biggest reason why Dave wanted me teaching this class. It is about an android caretaker for an aging Alzheimer's patient. And it has, for the purposes of the story, it has essentially two superpowers. It has computer-assisted empathy, so it understands what people are feeling, and it has emulation circuits so it can sort of look like and pretend to be the people around it. And that becomes a powerful storytelling tool for presenting the viewpoints of different characters through a neutral observer. And so that is probably the reason why Dave asked me to present this. I just never thought of it at the time. If you've seen the videos before, you've seen me talk about tools, not rules. Nothing is a rule. Everything is a tool. I added in a new slide to this section, my favorite William Goldman quote. And he applied this to screenwriting, but it applies to all the creative arts. Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows for a certainty what's going to work. That's why when someone tells you a rule, it's frustrating because often you follow the rule to the letter and it doesn't work. Well, maybe you're not following it well. And I see a lot of people digging in to say, I'm going to do that even harder now. But sometimes it's because for that story, for that circumstance, that rule does not apply. So again, remember, even if I say it's a rule, it's still a tool. Now, if you've seen the videos, you should know this, but I'll make it clear, especially with only 2 of you here. Your questions are more important than my slides. So if you see a question, don't hesitate to jump in with it as we go. It's also possible that this talk will be shorter than an hour. It kind of depends. I presented it before in a 1-hour format, and I'm always surprised why it runs to an hour because it feels to me like less than an hour's material. But a lot of what makes it go longer is the questions. So if neither of you have questions anywhere along the way, we might end up with a very shortened session. We still have nobody else asking to join. So I'm going to show you a few slides, but I'm going to do a lot of talking and examples and responding to questions. The slides are just there to sort of give me a springboard to talk from. Now, many people writing science fiction have this feeling like they need to work on the humanity, on their characters being empathetic. Sometimes, though, you get questions from the other side. You get people who are like, I know how to tell a story, but I don't know how to do the science. The science, I'm afraid because I can't do the science. And I like this quote from Rob Sawyer, who is an excellent award-winning writer himself and also a judge for Writers of the Future, which is how I know him. It's like becoming a sports journalist. You don't have to be an athlete to write about sports. You don't have to be a scientist to write well about science. You do have to be curious. You have to do the research. You have to go out and put yourself in a world where science will impinge upon you and will soak into your brain. And we talked about this in session 3. How you don't really have to be an expert because the experts never agree with each other anyway. You really just have to satisfy that sweet spot between 1 and 2 standard deviations. And we talked about some useful research tools for the sweet spot. Go back to session 3 for a lot more than this. These are just the ones I typically point out as part of this talk. And is there anything here that I missed on the other one? I didn't mention Orbit Simulator, which is more astronomical calculators. I don't remember if I mentioned Launchpad or not. Launchpad Astronomy Workshop is a wonderful but very selective way to increase your science knowledge. It's a workshop that they teach every spring when they can get funding because they are funded by different grants and so on. It's taught out at the University of Wyoming at one of their schools. It's known for its astronomy program. And they take a small handful, basically a classroom, of writers, artists, editors, filmmakers, and put you through astronomy boot camp for a week. And their goal, very explicit goal, is they want you to put better science in your stories because they think that the better science will then educate the public. And they have strong hopes that this is happening. Some of their graduates have certainly demonstrated this. To give you an idea of how intense it is, I am 62 and I've been a science fanatic studying this stuff, not professionally, but as a very, very strong sweet spot person who's like really into the science since I was 5 years old. So that's more than 5 decades now. When I went to Launchpad, I had more than 50 pages of handwritten notes of things I didn't know before. And I thought I was pretty well informed. And judging by the questions from some of the other attendees, I was really well informed. And they dumped that much more on us. Launchpad, you have to apply. You have to be able to prove to them that you have an audience that you have reached, because they're trying to reach your audience with real science. Now, when it comes to science, when it comes to empathy, setting really is character. I know we talk about it as a separate thing, but Dean Wesley Smith, among others, teaches this concept that setting is character, because setting is what character responds to. This is, I guess they call it the rain room. It's an interesting little experiment. I think it's in Chicago, a room where you can just walk in and you're going to be caught in a rainstorm of various strengths. It's just an experience that you pay for. And looking at these two women in the rain room, you can look at that one on the left and the one on the right, essentially the same rainstorm. And that one on the left is about 10 seconds away from breaking out into a dance. And the one on the right is about 10 seconds away from killing somebody. Because setting and how your character responds to it is character. And that's why when I heard this quote from Nnedi Okorafor, another award-winning writer and another Writers of the Future winner, who when I first was in the workshop with her, had just recently turned Binti into a it had started as a novella in, I forget what market, but she had just published it herself and was starting to turn it into the series it became. And this quote, when she wrote Binti, she was thinking about her fears, and she fears space. Too claustrophobic. It's a place that kills people. If you're a creature from Earth, you die out there. So when she was thinking about facing her fears, that's what drove Binti. And I pumped my fist. Yes. The science matters in how the characters react to it. And this particular presentation, ostensibly aimed at science fiction writers, is ultimately about how are characters reacting to what's going on around them. And we will talk about the principles, and they won't necessarily be science fictional principles, but you need to keep them in mind as you're writing your science fiction. And this is tricky for me. When I said that Dave asked me about this and I was confused, I was thinking in the back of my mind about the centipede's dilemma. If you're unfamiliar with the poem, it's an old poem, 1870s or 80s, I think, about a centipede walking happily down the road, and a toad says, "Wow, that's amazing. How do you keep all those legs straight?" And the centipede thinks and thinks and thinks and never leaves the spot because it's so busy thinking about how it moves the legs that it can't move the legs. And I think this is a common fear from writers who are kind of at a level where they're thinking about their own writing process. There's this fear that, hey, if I think about this too hard, am I going to lose it? I go through the centipede's dilemma several times a year, and I have to stop and remind myself of, you did it before, just do it again. But I'm also teaching and talking about my writing process. So I have to stop and analyze how I do what I do. And I'm worried that if I do, I will break it. So far, I haven't. And I'm hoping that I continue to not do that. But thinking about these things is really kind of worrisome in that sense, that if you think about them too hard, they're hard to do. Now, going back to the tools, not rules philosophy, when you are learning a technique, you often have to treat it as a rule because you're drilling. You are doing drills so that it becomes easy to do. And I think of this sort of learning at a 3-level process of how, when, why. How is how to actually master the technique. Dave, you've done drills in the Army. JT, I'm sure you've had drill sorts of situations. I am a very bad fencer, but I am a fencer. I've learned how to fence, and that involves a lot of drilling on how to do the techniques before you go out and fight somebody, so that when the time comes that you need to make that particular parry and disengage, you are ready to do it without having to think about it. You're past the how, and hopefully you're on the when. The why is the next level up. The why is, why did I want to do that? Well, if I disengage from that, it would draw him into another attack, which would open him up to me. And we have Bex joining us. If I were to make that disengage, it would draw him into another thrust, which is exactly what I'm ready to counter. And so the why is the next level of sophistication. Beyond the why, you start to get into the just almost a zen of, I just know this is the next thing to do. And that's kind of where I apparently am, not to brag on myself, but people are telling me I'm doing the humanity, the empathy well, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm not planning it. I am just trying to be my characters. And that is an important element here. Recognizing that your characters have moods and you want to be true to them. I think a big part of why I am successfully writing emotional scenes and humanity in my characters is because while on the outer surface, I am the cold, logical Spock on the left, inner me is a sap. Inner me is absolutely feeling all the feels. And the outer me is translating them into words and situations. But that inner me, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I have cried at my own stories, particular scenes. And sadly, these are all reasons why you can understand my crying. One was shortly after my friend Walter Mayhos passed away at a very young age from diabetes, which I myself am a diabetic, and he had just sold like 3 stories, his launch of his professional career, and we lost him. And I wrote a story to commemorate him, and it got so bad I had to drive off the road because I was doing my usual dictating while driving. I couldn't see the road. I had to pull off the road because I was so into the feeling of the character inspired by Walter, who was being shown this grand vision of everything he's going to do, all the people he's going to inspire, all of this, and then he's told, but you don't get to see it. There was another one, similar sort of thing, another tribute to a lost friend. Dr. Philip Keldon was a science fiction writer, pretty good one, but never, I think, what he could have been, because he was first and foremost a physics professor. That was his true passion. And the day we lost him, I wrote a Dr. Phil story, which again, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and just had to wait before I could drive or finish the story. So part of this, and I can't give you a magic trick to be this, but part of it is to be a sap underneath, and don't be ashamed of it. Don't try to hide it. Do try to translate it as you bring it out into the words, because you need to present that in a way that gets across to the reader. You need to have empathy, the big buzzword we've been talking about since the start here. Empathy is this concept that part of how you understand others is recognizing their feelings in your feelings. Recognizing that would make me sad, so it would make them sad. What do I do when I'm sad? How do they react? Well, they might not react in the same way because they're not you. But you understand the sadness is there. Now you can take what you know about the character and say, how does this character react to sadness? Maybe this is a character who has to go out and get violently drunk. Maybe this is a character who has to hide in her room for the next week. Maybe this is a character who denies it and denies it and denies it until they explode. Recognizing that the feeling is there is step one. Translating it into appropriate behavior for that character is step two. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist or neurobiologist, so I'm relaying old information I heard in an interview one time that makes sense to me, but I can't say that I'm an expert on this. This particular neurobiologist was talking about the ability in your brain, I don't have the right words for it, but essentially to shift your personality a little bit, to shift into another person. You're not quite yourself for that period. You are that other person. You are become that other person. And how that is kind of a basis for empathy, that you are able to see the world from that other character's point of view or other person's point of view. And this, I think, is a crucial thing that writers have to a degree or a more degree or less, but we all have to have it to pretend to be those characters so we can pretend on how they would think and how they would respond. And they talked about this plasticity. I think that was the term they used. Of course, neuroplasticity has other meanings, but they kind of described it as plasticity. People have it in more or less degrees. And if you have none of it, I don't remember if that made you a psychopath or a sociopath, but essentially it meant that you literally have no ability to see that other people are people. You just have this experience of what you feel and what you think, and they are merely presences in your world. They are not people like you are. So if you have too little of this empathetic shift, you're a sick person and dangerous. If you have too much, on the other hand, you are essentially at the point where you're having dissociative identity disorder. You too easily become another person to the point where you are no longer able to function as one coherent person. We as writers don't want to be at either of those extremes, but that is the capability you need to tap into. I wish, again, I had a tool for telling you how to do it. We will talk about some tools towards the end, but they are not by any means guaranteed. They are exercises to try to encourage it. And it turns out that there is some very specific neurobiology behind empathy. They call them mirror neurons. And this came from a friend who is in the neuropsychology world. He's also in other worlds. He does a lot with kids, but he was pointing me towards this research, the concept of mirror neurons. And they've tested it with functional MRI with monkeys. Functional MRI can show you which neurons are responding at different times. So you have the monkey with nothing happening and at rest. Okay, all the nerves are at rest. If the monkey reaches out and grabs a ball, a bunch of nerves fire that are all part, not just the motor nerves, but sort of the sensory nerves, the cognitive nerves. A bunch of those nerves fire. If you grab the ball, some of those same nerves fire. Not all of them. The monkey doesn't imitate your actions, so the motor nerves don't. Some of the nerves actually fire because the monkey understands what you are doing. And that understanding is part of what those nerves represent. So this is a physiological basis for that personality shift that the interviewer was talking about way back when. I don't know how many of these are in the detail. I need to do some research to talk about this in more depth, but there are definitely nerves that are the concept of doing, not the actual doing themselves. And so the monkey has this concept of you are grabbing this. And you can see this with animals all over the place. Sometimes they are understanding what you're doing. They see you eating, and so they assume that food must be food. It's not you're just a random thing in the area. They're watching you. I happen to have 4 very rambunctious kittens right now, and they can tell when I'm eating, and they immediately want to come up and know more. Even if it's food they don't like, the act of me eating draws their attention. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest tools of building empathy is also, unfortunately, one of the hardest for many writers. We as a group, which is kind of surprising considering we want to go out and share our stories with the world, we as a group tend to side more introvert than extrovert. Even me, and I'm up here, I'm a ham, I love an audience. Deep inside, there's this introvert side that wants to be far away from anybody else. And that's no way to build empathy. One of the biggest ways of building empathy is the Jane Goodall approach. Go be with people, go be with them, live with them, do things with them. What she did, if you're not familiar at this late age with Goodall, is she went and lived with the gorillas out in the jungle with as little human technology and presence as she could get away with. And she did this for a long time. And she learned to behave like one of them and learned to interact with them as a peer. Now, does that mean you have to go and live with a bunch of space pirates? Well, good luck finding them, first of all. You're not going to. But the concept of building empathy by going out among people is one of the most powerful empathy tools. You just have to remember one thing. She very much strove, and I don't know how well she succeeded because I can't read her mind, but she strove not to be judging the gorillas as how they were behaving. She strove only to be like them, to understand them from a point of view of what are they doing? Can I do that? What are they doing? What did they accomplish? What seems to be their goals? And so on. So when you are trying to build empathy through this very extroverted approach of go out and be with people, you need to do it with an extremely open mind, listening to them, not even consciously trying to learn from them. Although that is your motivation in the back of your mind, in the front, it is, I want to be with these people and be part of what they're doing. If you are familiar with Writers of the Future, one of their workshop exercises is what they call the 24-hour story exercise. It has got, I swear, 100 different goals to teach you. But one of the biggest is learning from people. There are 3 elements that start out the exercise. They give you a random piece of junk from Tim Power's bag of junk. In my case, it was a 7-year Alcoholics Anonymous sobriety chip. They take you someplace to read random books and articles just to get you thinking outside of your comfort zone. And then you have to talk to a random stranger. And oh God, that makes the introverts panic. That makes every one of those introverted writers panic. In my case, the panic turned off as soon as I realized I had to get a haircut, which meant I had to sit in a chair and talk to somebody for 20 minutes or more, which meant I would be talking to a random stranger. And that worked because it let me be part of her world. I happened to get a gem of a hairstylist who was talkative and full of information, full of family history, and she did most of the talking, which I got really lucky there. I just had to once in a while ask an interesting question. But the point was, I was being in her world, not being in my world and looking at her world. I was being there with her. Now, a lot of what I have to say about the topic of empathy is actually captured in this book, the one we talked about at the start of the class. Today I Am Carrie, again, is about an android which has almost supernatural empathy. It can read your body language, your facial expression, the tone of your voice. Maybe it's reading subtle physical cues as well. It knows what you're thinking and not what you're thinking, but what you're feeling. And an important plot element, it is a certified licensed medical device, which means it's covered by HIPAA laws, which means it can't tell me what you're feeling because it has diagnosed something in you. That is medical privacy. So in a particular point in the book, there are 2 characters who the android knows what both of them are thinking and could resolve all their stress and problems if it simply told each of them. But it can't. That's HIPAA. That's privacy. What it has to do instead is to slowly and carefully convince each of them to talk about their feelings with the other. So a lot of what I come by in empathy in my writing gets captured in this book. And I believe this is why Dave thought I should present on this topic. And if you go and study on emotional intelligence and empathy as a field of study, you'll find a number of useful exercises. I want to talk specifically about a bunch of these, and especially about one that actually shows up as a plot element in the book. So we talked about the first one. Notice that the first 5 of these are all in scary font. They're scary font because they're things that I think are difficult for the introverts to go out and do. And yet they are the ways to build empathy. And I believe, unless the introversion is extreme, I believe we're all capable of doing these things, but we have to choose to do them. We have Bob Feingold joining us. So these are techniques that can be stressful if you are an introvert, but I think that they are things you can practice and get better at that will naturally help build your empathy. And we kind of talked about the first one already, the talking to strangers, which is, man, that's the introvert's first primary problem, is talking to strangers. There are ways you can be doing more of it. In my case, for instance, the hairdresser. You can be participating in online groups and talking versus typing. Both are ways to communicate. If you're not yet comfortable at the talking level, the typing level, text-based messages back and forth. But your goal is to hear these people, hear them as themselves. Not, I mean, yes, you want to be conversing with them, but you want the majority of the conversation be their concerns, their excitements, their victories, their losses, so that you can hear how they are reacting to things in the world. And since we're talking about empathy, thinking about how, gee, have you ever been through an experience like this? Has this ever come across to you? Have you ever had a loss like that, or ever had a success like that? Talking to strangers is the first and most direct. Related to that is do something challenging. The do something challenging has 2 goals, 2 benefits. First, it necessarily involves talking to strangers. Second, it puts you out of your comfort zone, which is often where we learn most. So doing something challenging, as an example, as some of you know, I improvise most of my stories. I just start talking, story falls out of my mouth. And I'm thinking about how to do this, especially because people ask me how I do it. I'm trying to explain the process. We're back to that whole centipede's dilemma. And so as part of trying to understand the process, I decided I wanted to take an improv class at the local theater. And this, I mean, I'm glad you're all here. I love you dearly for all showing up. If you were randomly, the 4 of you, standing at a convention talking to each other, the odds that I would walk up and join in are practically 0. Because even though I love having you folks to talk with, my inner self is that introvert. So now I have to go to this acting class, this improv class, and meet the instructor and meet all these students and go through all these uncomfortable exercises, which, while they were fun, they turn out to have very little, almost 0, to do with how I improvise my stories. Because so much of improv classes is about the collaborative effort, and so much of the teaching is about how you play off each other. And unless I'm having a little dissociative identity disorder myself, I can't play off myself when I'm dictating. Well, maybe I do have a little, because I do. I have had the odd experience of my characters having a better vocabulary than I do. My characters know words that I don't know. Now, obviously, if my character's using the words, I know them, but they are not things that I have ever used in my daily life. I must have run across them in my reading. And every time this happens, I'm going through and cleaning up the transcript, and I find this word, and it's like, Does that word mean what I think it means? Did my character use it right? The answer is universally yes. So somewhere in my brain that was buried, and my characters just came out with it. But the idea of doing something challenging is go work in a group, volunteer for a cause, take a class, um, uh, go find just a open invitation to social events of whatever kind. Go to a Renaissance fair, go to a theater, go to something that is outside your comfort zone. By doing that, you're having to stretch your comfort zone and you are having to interact with people, the talk to strangers side of things. Um, Role play. You'll notice role play on this list twice. We'll get to the second one. But role play here is a very common therapeutic technique where you have conversations with somebody else pretending to be somebody who's not you. If you're watching a sitcom, universally it's you're pretending to be the other person and vice versa. But it doesn't have to be that. But trying to be someone not you and trying to be a faithful representation of that someone not you forces you to stop and think about how they react. But you can't stop and think too much because you're in the middle of the therapy session. And again, it doesn't have to be therapy. I see this sometimes in acting classes of trying to be that other person because we know that's what acting ultimately is about, is you have to be these other characters. So the role play as therapy, as acting, can help you expand that comfort zone, that little zone of self in the center of the brain, into larger areas. And going beyond that, acting classes per se, not just the improv. I love the improv, but you learn more about character motivation and everything if you go into traditional acting classes, because improv is very much about this special relationship of you and I telling a story together without either one of us knowing what it is. Traditional acting can often be, here is a character who is doing these things, and you need to be that character and find your reasons why they do these things. It is kind of a joke when you watch this happen in TV shows and so on, where they make jokes about the character. I can't find his motivation. It's not a joke. For really serious actors, if you can't understand why the character's doing it, you can't do it convincingly. And community projects, again, I talked about doing something challenging. Community project can also help. So go volunteer at a blood drive. Go volunteer at your school's talent night. Find some community project where you can put yourself out there. And again, if you're an introvert, I understand this is hard, but getting yourself involved, first of all, it may break down some of that introversion because the people aren't as scary when you're working on a project. They're scary when you're trying to walk in with no reason and introduce yourself to this group. They're not scary when you're all getting together because you need to raise money for band uniforms. You may still be the person off in the corner, but you'll get brought into conversations. You'll be asked for your opinion. Joining a community project pushes you out of the comfort zone and into the empathy zone. Now, the simpler ones, the ones that are not scary for introverts, reading widely. If you read widely within your field, outside of your field, fiction mostly, but also history, some nonfiction beyond that. But you really want things that are about the motivations of characters. And things like surgical journal generally aren't about motivations. But a journal of doctors and their personal problems is going to introduce you to things that probably wouldn't be in the surgical journal. So reading widely, going back to role play. If you are not a role-playing gamer, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you for it. But I've been a role-playing gamer now since 1978, 79. And it has helped me wonderfully in being able to be characters, to think through characters, to be able to try to say, how would this character respond in this situation? Now, it's not the same for everybody. My friend Rich, love him dearly. Rich pretty much always plays a big guy with a sword or a little sneaky thief who thinks he's a big guy with a sword because Rich just wants to go out and attack things. So Rich is not really exploring other personalities. When you role play, if you role play for entertainment, push yourself, and that will help you build empathy. Writing from multiple point of views. Take the exact same scene that you just wrote from the point of view of the bank robber and rewrite it from the point of view of the hostage. Rewrite it from the point of view of the police negotiator outside. Rewrite it from the point of view of the mother who's worried about her daughter in there. When you do this, you already know the facts. You know the elements of the story. Although you may discover new ones as you look from the other point of view. But you already know the elements. What you are doing is putting yourself in the heads of these other characters to see how they react, how they comprehend the scenario. And finally, and this is the one that we will see coming from Today I'm Carrie, is the concept of analyzing scenarios. And this is actually a formal method in emotional intelligence tests. Which again, I am not an expert on, but I read enough to have an idea of how to write this part of the book. The idea of you present a scenario, artificial in that it's pretty much always performed by actors pretending to be characters. So you're kind of getting empathy once removed. You're trusting that they have empathy for their characters, and then you can look and try to understand their motivations because they are trying to be the motivations of their characters. And you answer questions. So here was a stripped down version of the exercise that's in Today I Am Carrie. The room lights dim, the screen grows bright. An image appears, a picnic scene with a number of humans sitting on a blanket or playing on the grass near a stream. A display bubble near each character gives their names. Martha, thin African-American woman dressed in a yellow sundress, hands a dish to Jerry. Her eyes are wide and bright. Potato salad, Jerry? Jerry, a very fit but slightly older man in a blue t-shirt and jeans, takes the bowl. Thank you. When his fingers brush Martha's, they both smile. Glenn and Philippe toss a frisbee nearby. Glenn looks over and his eyes darken when he sees Martha and Jerry. Philippe calls, Glenn! But too late. The frisbee hits Glenn in the head. Glenn stumbles backwards, almost bumping into Isabel, who's bringing more food from somewhere outside of the scene. She deftly keeps the bowl in her hands as she laughs at the look on his face. Wendy and Rob enter the scene from the other side, both looking around at the ground. Rob holds a broken leash. Rex, he says. Come on, Rex, where are you? Wendy steers closer to Rob and pats him on the arm. It's okay, she says. He won't go far. We'll find him. Rob looks toward the stream. I don't know if he knows how to swim. Wendy smiles, but it looks forced. All dogs can swim, Rob. He'll be all right. So there's a scenario. And let's ask some questions, and feel free to unmute and jump in with how you feel about it. So looking at this, which characters are happy in this scene?
Martha and Jerry.
Okay, anybody disagree on that? What about Isabel? Is she happy, or do we not really have enough to tell? We see her laughing, but that's just a very brief part of the scene. So can we tell?
I don't think so.
All right. So, which characters are anxious?
The two looking down at the ground.
Okay. Would you call Glenn anxious, or would you use another word to describe his emotion? I personally would put Glenn more in the category of jealous. If he saw the two of them kissing, he might move into anxious, or he might move into angry. Okay. How is Rob going to feel if he can't find Rex?
Start getting worried.
Okay.
Yeah, sad, worried.
Yeah. And this is an interesting part of emotional intelligence testing. There are two factors, and the second one is actually more important for empathy. One is how are they feeling and one is predicting how they will feel in certain circumstances. So the first one is the assessment. The second one is the forecasting, the idea of putting yourself in his place to say, how is Rob going to feel? So these are two similar but different questions. Which characters might be concealing their feelings?
Martha and Jerry, uh, Philip.
I think you mean Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn.
Yeah. And this is sort of a stronger level of empathy, not a stronger, but sort of a broader level of empathy, is understanding the feelings shown and the feelings not shown. So this exercise is an example in the book. This is, I basically made up my own because all of the exercises I could find online were, of course, copyrighted material. But it's the same basic concept of looking at a scenario and stopping and analyzing. It's the difference between reading and analysis. And you can do this anytime without having to step out of your introvert bubble. Take a story, especially if it's one you already know well, and go through scenes. And instead of just enjoying the information, stop and ask the questions. Come up with a list of standard questions. The one I came up with here are some examples. Come up with a list of questions you want to ask. And this is just an exercise to stretch your empathy muscles by going through and looking at what you already know and analyzing it. So if it were me, of course, I would be very likely to take scenes out of The Lord of the Rings and apply the questions, or scenes out of Star Trek and apply the questions, and so on. Questions on this exercise? All right, where are we at? All right, so that's basically today's topic. We're a little short of an hour, but I did say that depends on the amount of questions I have to answer and so on. Sometimes it runs longer. This is our upcoming schedule. Next week is a different one. And I want to do these different ones occasionally here and there. That instead of teaching a topic, I want to teach a mentor and what I learned from them and what you could still learn from them and places you can learn from them and so on. And because Dave asked for this particular session way back when, I am doing my first tribute to Dave. And it's going to be a little bit of a different class because I'm going to choke up a lot because we still miss Dave pretty bad. Um, we will be having the tribute to Dave next week. And after that, this is one that I came up with in response to somebody's talking about writer's block. And I said, you're not really talking about writer's block. You're talking about fill in the blank. And here's what you could do about it. So the 15th would be talking about 12 different things that aren't really writer's block and ways to address them. The 22nd, we'll be talking about dictation based on my book with Kevin J. Anderson and Greg Vos. 29th, we'll be talking about world building for pantsers, essentially. Doesn't mean it can't apply to plotters, but it's the idea of you build pieces of your world as you tell your story and then you ruthlessly stick to them. July 6th, we'll be talking about story lengths for different genres. 13th, we'll be talking about the goal game, a way to ask questions to help you figure out what's going on in your story. July 20th, How I Met Your Story is about frame stories and nonlinear narratives. 27th will be Dwarves in the Woods, 4 levels of learning, which I kind of talked about in the different ones. But I want to hit that one hard on the 27th. August 3rd will be my next tribute to Dean Wesley Smith. And August 10th will be the first of my very space-specific and science-specific ones. We'll be talking about distance and scope in space, which can drive me up a wall. But again, remember, the sweet spot is a small chunk of the total audience. But I still hope to convince you to stick within realistic distance and scope. Come in. Come on. So again, if you appreciate this, take a look at my books. I'd be grateful. Finishing up, any questions? All right. If there are no more questions, then I'm ready to call this session done and stop recording.